Good Friday, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com podcast with Jesse Simonton and Austin Price. I'm Brett Hubbs. Glad to have you along with us on this Friday as Tennessee, from a football standpoint, a big week. On the practice field, getting a lot done for bowl preparations. We'll get to that in a little bit, but obviously with signing day going smoothly for Tennessee, we've talked a lot about it, guys, with the recaps and stuff that we've done, but you get another day away from it, chance to decompress a little bit. What's your biggest takeaway from the assembly of this class? Not necessarily who they got on signing day or how signing day went, but when you think about kind of the broad spectrum of the assembly of this class, what's the overriding takeaway that you have?
For me, and it's something Jesse talked about when we did the TV show after everything had wrapped up on Wednesday, was just the kind of the change in philosophy. A year ago, they went with very little in-state kids, and this year they kind of flipped the script and went in-state heavy. And 10 of your 21 are from the state of Tennessee, and it's just a change in philosophy. And I'm not saying that they didn't feel this way a year ago, but I think that they looked around and liked what they saw a lot more in 20 than they ever did in 19. And it changed how they kind of approach things.
That's what I was going to say. Was this a change in philosophy or just a change in talent level? They like the 2020 talent level in state better than they like the 2019 talent level.
A little bit of both, but I do think that going forward that it will be this will be more the rule than the exception. I think last year is going to be more the exception. I think you're going to, they may not sign 10 every year.
Right.
But I do think that they're going to, try to sign a good core group of in-state kids almost every year.
And they still bet on their evaluations. I mean, that's probably what's most interesting about this. The number one guy, they really did not have much interest in the number one player in the state.
Yep. I mean,
despite my snafus on message boards, they are not interested.
They are not going after, unless something changes. I mean, Grimes obviously did not sign. Is that a similar deal to what's happening here? With a guy like Kyra Miller, or is he honestly looking around? We'll see, but I don't see Tennessee really kicking the tires there. But Tennessee then did go after, and the three of us all felt that they had to. This is a class, a unique group in terms of just the amount of big bodies in this state this year, offensive line and defensive line. And Tennessee did not land them all.
Big bodies at linebacker too.
But they landed a bunch of them, and they're still in the mix for one of the biggest fish that's still out there in Jay Hardy. As of this taping. But again, they bet on their evaluations. I mean, Dallas Walker's going to Texas A&M. Tennessee could have had Dallas Walker back in February, back in March, decided not to, pivoted elsewhere.
Could have had Chris Morris, and they like Chris Morris, the player, but I do think that some of the, kind of Paw Patrol issues and all that off the field and stuff maybe just didn't mesh well with.
But you land Big O, you had to get that
yep.
one. You repair the relationship with the Mays family. You make Cooper a priority. You get Cooper. You get Tyler Barron. Keyshawn was one you had to have. And then again, you bet on your evaluations where 6 months ago they had no interest in Tamaria McDonald and Martavis French, and 3 months later suddenly they become priorities, and a month after that you land them.
Well, and that was the question I was going to ask too. When you talk about philosophy, I think one of the changes in philosophy that we've seen with this staff, and I don't know that you can say just in state, but it's magnified in state. A year ago, they made early decisions on kids in 2019, particularly in state, and said, we're done. We're not going to recruit you. We're moving on elsewhere. Early on in this class, they weren't in love with all three guys from Whitehaven, and at one point they weren't going to take any of those guys. But the philosophy shift of David Johnson and the philosophy shift that they had within the state to keep relationships with people to where you have a chance to go get them. Whereas a year ago when they tried to go back in on Joseph Anderson, they didn't have a chance because they hadn't done anything to keep it warm. They hadn't done anything to kind of continue to recruit him, but they did this year. To me, that's one of the biggest philosophical changes that we've seen from this program under Jeremy Pruitt, from last year's recruiting cycle to this year's recruiting cycle.
Well, you can't pee down your leg, clean it up, and then act like you didn't just pee down your leg. I mean, that's what they did a year ago.
That's pretty good. I had to think on that one for a minute. But you're right. I mean, that's they told people you weren't good enough, Austin, and then they come back to you
And they said, well, we think you're good enough.
We think you're good enough. And Joseph Anderson's like, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. I wasn't good enough. And so they couldn't flip that one late. But this year, they've done a better job managing the relationships this year, I think.
Yes, and I think Jeremy, from a head coaching standpoint, realized people like the bluntness, but let's temper the bluntness. Like, it's okay to give them a real evaluation and be honest and say, this is what I think about your game. This is where you've got to get better in these areas. But, you don't have to be so, I guess Jeremy learned to live in the gray a little more this year when it comes to, not being so black and white on.
Yeah, because let's face it, he's not at Alabama anymore.
Yeah, a year ago,
you can't be that selective.
And a year ago, I think that he recruited as if he was, and I think this year, But I'll say this: a lot of that Memphis and playing the game and continuing to recruit was all David Johnson, and that was all David just being David. That's just who he is. He's a good, down to earth guy who just loves being around kids. And even when Tennessee wasn't going to take Tamarion McDonald or Jabari Small, he continued to recruit those guys because you never say never in recruiting.
Well, and he's got Tennessee. He's got his talons and some guys that Tennessee may end up going after in February.
Yeah,
and they're Louisiana kids that are just
correct. Like Corey Wren's a perfect example of that because
Jonathan
he's not
Horton.
signed. He can run. Horton. Tennessee wants to try to continue to add team speed. And they want to try to find a corner. They want to try to, I think some people on the staff would love to add another offensive lineman, but because of Reginald Perry's versatility, and he's going to start on the defensive line, but as you've talked about, Jesse, he probably projects on the offensive line at some point down the road. Because of the versatility there, it does change some things as far as changes how you work the numbers.
It's kind of fascinating. Where David Johnson has probably his lack of Power 5 experience probably helped him this year with those relationships. Because, and by the way, I would throw Trey Amos in there as another guy.
Louisiana,
he's got his talent, he's got his claws in potentially for February if they want to go that direction. But when you're at a non-Power 5 traditional power school, non-SEC school, you're not necessarily taking everybody else's scraps, but you're also you're kind of hanging around in case, like if you're recruiting Louisiana from Memphis, you're hanging around in there in case A&M and LSU doesn't have room for a guy.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're banking on you trying to have a better relationship that you can swoop in and get a good player who got caught up in the squeeze. If you don't continue to recruit that guy, you have no chance. So in some ways, his lack of Power 5 experience probably, and relying on his previous experiences, Austin, may have helped him with the Whitehaven kids and some of these other kids keeping him warm.
Now that he's had success, because again, this is just his second year at the Power 5 level. Now that he's had a little bit of success, he's going to think, okay, now this is how I recruit. I'm not going to change how I recruit. I'm going to continue to be me. I'm going to continue just to love on kids, which is, he's an old high school coach, kind of rose the coaching ranks and so on and so forth, and he just relates well, not to just kids, but to families, to grandparents. He's a guy that everybody likes.
And he keeps grinding. He's a guy who, and I'm not knocking other guys on the staff. I'm saying this is one of his strengths. Jesse, he makes the call every week. He doesn't skip. If he's supposed to call on Tuesday night, he's calling on Tuesday night. If he needs to send the DM every Wednesday morning, he doesn't miss a beat with that, which is given him longevity in this class to be able to get guys at the end because he's rose with them the whole way. Whether it's a guy that maybe Tennessee wasn't in love with from the get-go or a guy they were in love with the get-go like Omari Thomas.
But this class looks totally different if David Johnson isn't as dogged in his approach as he was for the last 6-8 months. It does. It just last year Niedermeyer got a lot of credit and deservedly so. This year, if Tennessee had a recruiting award, it would go to David Johnson.
And everybody on the staff would tell you that.
Yeah.
David Johnson's gotten a ton of praise from the guys around him that are the coaches on this team. And in reality, he's proven this year that he's a great. I equate it to baseball. He's a great starting pitcher. he's going to have to learn over time to be a closer. But he got in there and he kept Tennessee in the game as a starting pitcher.
Eat the innings.
And then DA comes in late with a guy like Omari Thomas and helps close the deal.
And he was big with that
Yeah, correct. And so, DJ will continue to adapt as a recruiter. To me, that's a great sign, and that's a big reason why Jeremy needs to pony up and pay the man, because, he's going to have some options. He's already, gotten calls, and it's just smart to, keep a guy that, really showing this kind of promise as a year 2 recruiter, much like Niedermeyer, who a year ago in year 1 on the field did what he did. That's 2 really solid recruiters that are just learning how to do it at this level.
Yeah, and again, I think that those are some positive signs. I think the other positive sign is that you see the benefit of continuity, okay, because you had a chance to recruit the entire year. You don't have a big – I know they had some turnover last year with Jim Chaney and everything, but you still had relationships in place with a lot of guys, which was important for them. And I think it's those relationships that when you look back on this thing – that's really intriguing from the standpoint of now that the season's over, the class is signed. I'm still surprised they did not lose more guys in September, first part of October, when this thing looked like 1-6. Aren't you guys surprised that they didn't have some public decommits and some guys? I know Callaway had options, and I know some other guys had options and talked to some schools and maybe took a visit here or there. Keyshawn Lawrence got a little bit, publicly squirrely there a little bit. But I'm really surprised they didn't lose anybody of note, during that stretch when it was losing to Georgia State, losing to BYU, and things weren't going well.
Yeah, because BJ waited to decommit all the way until about Halloween. He stuck it through all the way until I think it was like the 27th or 28th of October. So I'm in agreement with there. This class had its typical turnover. I think there was 10 decommitments. Some they were just fine with. The Lovey Jenkinses and the Art Greens, but some there was the BJ Ojalaris and the Mordecai McDaniels and Kristen Stories that they would have liked to end up in this class, and that's just kind of the way recruiting works these days with the early signing period and kids making decisions so much quicker than normal. But to your point, they were able to kind of tread water long enough with the guys they had, and it helped, I think, frankly, that a lot of those guys were either in the boat early or they were a Dominique Bailey who they had pretty much shut it down, or they were, in-state guys like Cooper Mays and those guys that were going to kind of stay loyal no matter what.
Yeah, you're right. They got to help there. I think they did a good job, Austin, continue to communicate with those guys and say, hey, we're coming, watch us. And look, they benefited from the fact that what they were telling them was going to happen actually ended up happening, and they won games down the stretch.
They won down the stretch, and they did so with some young kids that were in last year's class, and those guys. Another wise move was letting some of those young guys talk. Letting Henry talk, letting Quavaris Crouch talk, letting Wanye talk, and letting those recruits who know those guys because they're just a cycle ahead of them hear their voice and talk about hey, what they told me is true. Everything that I was told in recruiting, has come true to this point, yada, yada, yada. And I think that resonates because, again, Eric Gray knows the kids at Whitehaven, knows Omari Thomas, Jabari Small. So when he talks and they see stuff he said and he's backing up what the Tennessee coaches are saying to them behind the scenes in recruiting, then it resonates.
Yeah. Well, look, you had a couple kids tweet out just today about how impressed they were with what Tennessee did on signing day with their presentation on signing day. You had a couple of Whitehaven kids mentioning, how clean that was. Some of those things may seem.
Look at Hubs throwing out the lingo. How clean that was.
Well, sorry, but it's one.
Davis French tweeting about it being fresh.
But it's
can you say so fresh and so clean.
No, I'm not singing for you. But it's little things
right,
like
and that was
It's
smart
little
by
things
Tennessee.
like that you don't think about. But it does have some of that stuff for some kids does have an impact. Having Charles Davis, the voice of Madden, talking about a prospect, a signee at Tennessee, is carries weight with some kids. That's a cool thing for some kids.
Yeah, I mean it's an added flash. It's an
Right.
added flair. It's much like the facilities war, where it doesn't completely be like the end all be all decision making, but it could tip the scales.
All right, let's talk about moving forward with this class. Looking forward, they got 4 spots left, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we know this staff continues to recruit and continues to evaluate. You're going to have something on this coming up this weekend, Jesse. But what we know, Jay Hardy, we know D. Beckwith. Okay, they would take those 2 and run right now and be as elated as they could be.
And they feel like they're in a pretty good spot with D. Beckwith going into the new year. And the fact that Hardy, again, as of this podcast, has decided not to sign and is likely not going to sign. Austin said it. He's
That's an open invitation.
He switched the light to green for Tennessee to come recruit.
The one thing that makes things hard for anybody that's going to try to get involved with Jay in January is the fact, basketball. But it's also the fact he would have to pay his own dime to go wherever. And now maybe like.
But that's why it's easy for Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean,
Short drive up the road.
Chattanooga.
Yeah,
and he could drive to Auburn, but you're saying visit-wise,
his official visits have been used.
Exhausted.
So I mean, he can't go on an official. D. Beckwith, that one's going to get dicey. I mean, like that one will have 50 rumors on it. He'll take visits. Right now, Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee. Those are the top 3.
And he hasn't taken any officials yet, right?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the deal. But Tennessee's going to have Tennessee, Florida. Those 3 schools.
I think they're going to get the
be
last
there.
visit too.
And those 3 schools are going to be there because of the whole basketball, football combo deal that all 3 of those schools are currently offering. But it starts with them. We'll see what obviously happens with Darnell Washington.
I mentioned Wren.
Yeah,
I mentioned the Amos kid.
The Amos kid. I mean, a lot of these guys were in the war room. We had, AP put it out there, on signing day. I know he was a top 100 player. I'm not sure that Tennessee's interested in the Clowney kid who's teammates with Don Bailey, but perhaps they'll kick the tires there. They're going to kick the tires, and maybe it's more, the kid likes Tennessee more than Tennessee likes him, but in terms of offensive linemen, Jalen St. John's, former Missouri commit, is probably going to take a visit here.
Yeah, the 18th, I think.
Yeah, does Tennessee push in January? We'll see.
Kyra Miller's doesn't. I don't know that. I don't think he ends up here, but that one's probably not completely done at this point.
At the same time,
that one may be dependent on if if they like a different offensive lineman better.
Or if they decide to take another. They may not take another.
Well, I think that's the other question that you're sitting here now that they've got time to breathe and relax. Over the dead period here. What's the priority? What's the position priority? What are the hell they're looking for?
In an offensive lineman, they may look the transfer route. If that's available.
Do you keep one for a transfer?
I would.
I think it depends on the best available player.
Yeah, I wouldn't just take a kid to take a kid.
But would you sign 24 and hold a spot for a grad transfer?
So I would say no. I would if you feel like you like the 4 guys or 5 guys that are willing to commit to you, I would not just save a spot to potentially see who's out there in the spring. But if you're tepid, or if your staff is a little bit split on, do we take another cornerback like Appy or Amos, or do we want to wait? Because I do think this class probably needs another corner. But if they're not crazy about those 2 guys, now I think they kind of like them, but. That could be a position too, along with offensive line, that they wait, or maybe they could just hold a spot and say best available grad transfer.
The one thing that's interesting,
or just transfer.
See, I don't know why they would do that though. I don't know.
Unless you think a kid can win an appeal.
Yes.
Unless you think a kid's got a chance. You got to be
pretty darn confident because this.
We don't know. It depends. If you send it in early, it seems like the NCAA likes it. Then they kind of clamp down later in the year, right?
There's no rhyme.
There is no rhyme or reason
to any governing body in sport. Okay, there's no rhyme or reason to the decisions that they make.
What are the positions though that we're talking about? I mean, D. Beckwith could play. He play either side of the ball, right?
He could play wide receiver. He could play tight end.
Okay, so he could play either side of the ball.
You probably are putting him at tight end if you're not getting Darnell.
Okay,
he's probably going to start his career there.
You got the Wren kid who
can run,
and he's a jitterbug.
He can really run. Is he Isaiah McKenzie? Is he kind of somebody like that?
Yes,
type
but
player?
probably a little quicker, or a little faster,
uh,
excuse me, but probably doesn't have quite the moves.
But he's isn't he a little bigger than McKenzie? Though McKenzie was tiny with all the moves.
Ren's only about 5'8", 5'9".
Okay. Ren's a little, but
I think his straight line speeds is a little bit better than Isaiah's, but I don't know if he has quite the jitter.
All right, so you got those two receiver types,
Yes.
weapons in your offensive game. You got the kid in Rock Hill, South Carolina, that I don't know if Tennessee will do anything with him or not. The big receiver over there, different type of player. That I know Tennessee's had a conversation with him. Some other schools, I think he did not sign with Charlotte, where he's been committed to. Chris Drain Abrams, is that his name? Chris Drain?
Yeah, I don't see Tennessee.
Tennessee's not going to go back down that road, right?
I don't.
No.
But there's 3 offensive weapons. Do we think of the spots left that they're going to take another offensive weapon? Because they seem to be, more of those potential guys.
You're saying not counting Beckwith, then I would say yes.
Well,
In addition to Beckwith.
Right.
Yes, in addition to Beckwith, if you miss on Washington, I still think they want another playmaker.
Okay, I got you. All right, so let's talk about just kind of. I told Austin we would do this a little bit as we wrap up the recruiting part. We'll hit a little team news here before we close out the podcast. When you think back on this class and you think back on the trips you guys made, camps you went to, state tours, press conferences you attended, conversations you have, what are you going to remember about this class the most? I know they're not done, but what's going to be the 1 or 2 stories, 1 or 2 things that you'll remember about this class the most?
Jay Hardy's commitment video.
that one might get run before it's all said and done. I mean, is there a kid that left a bigger impression on you? Is there something that you'll remember back about this class? A highlight for you, a low light for you, a relationship, something that stood out. You go, I really like that kid. Well, he came here, he didn't come here.
Well, I mean, I think all the Memphis kids. I mean, Jesse and I met those kids. Coming out, Jesse had just started at Volquest at the time. It was our first state tour together, and Bryson Easton had just won the state MVP of the state championship game as a freshman. It was the spring of his freshman year, and so you go back to then.
That was his very first interview. He'd never done an interview before.
Yeah, so I mean,
wow, what did he look? I mean, size-wise, he was probably what? 35, 40 pounds lighter.
Oh yeah, every bit of it.
Maybe 50.
He still looked good.
Still looked good, and he still had that James Earl Jones voice thing going on.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the Memphis kids, I would say, and he doesn't do a lot of media, but we have been around him many times at these events and stuff. But Harrison Bailey's kind of maturation and transformation, I think, from when we first met him a couple years ago to how he is now. That kind of stands out. I know Tennessee fans finally got the good news yesterday, but it took a long time. I think it's going to be memorable how long the Tyler Barron.
Tyler Barron told me he was in this class 64 times. I'm doing it this day. Okay, that day comes, we're pushing it back. I mean, you still in? Oh yeah, I'm still in. I was at my wife's grandmother called. My wife's grandmother passed away. Tyler called me when I was at the funeral up in Pennsylvania. That was 2 days after the Kentucky game. And he's like, it's done. Okay, I'm going to do it on signing day. That's when he knew. I know he said Monday night.
Right.
But, I mean, he knew then. He went through the Kentucky, visit up there for the Tennessee-Kentucky game. He liked Kentucky. He liked their staff. I mean, his mom liked Kentucky a lot. Obviously Dad was here. And at the end, I did find it funny that Coach Morrow at Kentucky was kind of taking some veiled shots about negative recruiting and, all that kind of stuff. And in reality,
nothing cries like this out. And this is for if it happens with folks that work here. Nothing makes me laugh or makes me eye roll more is when people bellyache about stuff that they're doing that everyone else is doing.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Particularly in this league.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's a little bit more of a, I don't want to say a gentleman's code, but maybe that's the best way. A little bit more of a gentleman's agreement code in the Big Ten. and some other places that you kind of.
But then Urban went in there and ruffled
Right,
feathers.
and that's what made everybody in the Big Ten mad, was because he brought an SEC mentality into
exactly.
it. I mean, all that happens in the SEC when a kid commits is everybody recruits that kid harder.
Yeah, I mean, look at how the Rivals rankings finished. Tennessee would have the number 1 class in the Pac-12, the number 1 class or the number 2 class behind Oklahoma in the Big 12. They're 7th or 8th in the SEC.
Number 2 in the ACC, right? Behind Clemson. Number
Number
2 in the Big Ten behind Ohio State. Yes,
and they're
seventh.
middle of the
they're
pack.
7th out of 9. They're 9th. They're 7th in the SEC and they're 9th. The only 2 teams ahead of them are Clemson and Ohio State. So they would actually have the number 1 class in the Big 12.
So the point is that it's just because I guess. So I think Oklahoma probably will pass them with some guys they're supposed to get in February. But yes, you're right. So
that stands right now.
My point is just that. Just saying this, that's how competitive the SEC is, and that's why when people bellyache about all the stuff that happens in this league, recruiting wise, I just roll my eyes because it's Tennessee has better cards than Kentucky, but everyone's doing the same thing.
And that's why I think it's funny the Morrow guy. I mean, he's throwing stones in a glass house that I know he negative recruited. Okay,
I mean,
come on.
That's what I'm saying, but that's how it is everywhere. That's
but I mean,
it's so silly.
okay, there are people on this staff, and I've heard them talk about other staffs, and there are people on other staffs, and I've heard them talk about this staff, but they don't do it in public.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what he did.
Right, which is the comedy of it.
Yes, correct.
It's just the comedy of the fact, like, really, like you're going to bring that up public? Like, sure, there's negative recruiting. It's called recruiting.
Dan Mullen is notorious for kind of sticking his foot in his mouth in this instance as well.
Yeah, I think the one story that'll come out and will surprise me a little, and he may never end up in this class, is just how out of the blue the Kyra Miller thing was. You know what I mean? That you knew Tennessee was kind of evaluating, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Yeah, I'm committed." And you're like, "Huh?"
Well,
that's it. The staff didn't know he was committed.
Okay, maybe that's why that was a shock.
Because I remember calling.
But then the staff was worried about him getting his huddle tape out, scared that as good as this, you talk about behind the scenes stuff. The staff can be extremely fickle with some of their
when they took Jamari Butler 2 weeks later they cut him.
Yeah.
I mean, but
Tim Martin's like, "What the heck, guys? That was my dude."
Pretty interesting to see how a class comes together, kind of the anatomy of it, and you go back to Jimmy Callaway when he committed, everybody went, "Who?" And then at the end, that's a good eval that they're having to hold on to because all these other schools have come after them, and then there's guys that they got that everybody in the country wanted, and it's a story, a book within itself in terms of assembling a class. It's pretty fascinating. All right, let's jump to this current team real quick, finishing up some fundamental stuff, pretty normal on the practice field for this team. Anything jump out about this team's prep for Indiana? I kind of like the way they've done it and just, turnover circuit. They've kind of made it entertaining and kind of gone back to some basic stuff, focused on some individuals, but they haven't, they haven't made it all about the young people either. I mean, they've continued to get the Nigel Warriors and those guys the amount of work they need as well.
In individual time.
Right.
Now, when they went team, it's been a lot of the young guys.
Sure, because you don't want anybody to get hurt.
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, like you're talking about,
And they're down linemen, too. They got to be careful with the offense.
Well, and I think that's the biggest storyline as this team breaks, because I don't expect Brandon Kennedy to be able to play in the bowl game, as we noted in the war room. I know they're going to reevaluate that, but I think that would be a surprise to everybody if he played. So how does Carvin handle the center position?
You saw Locklear getting first-team reps on Thursday. Does that continue? Because they could decide that maybe they like Carvin at guard still.
Right. And Locklear at center.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is the biggest storyline going in. I mean, you want to keep everybody healthy, but how does that offensive line shake out? What kind of continuity do they have at that center position? And what can they generate in a short period of time? Tennessee will practice over the weekend, no media access. They break for Christmas. They actually come back to Knoxville, practice a couple of days, and then go to Jacksonville. It's kind of a short stay in Jacksonville. It's not your typical bowl prep down there where you're down there, 7 or 8 days. You kind of get down there and get ready to play, which I think some people like about that bowl. They don't make you do as much stuff as some of the other bowls do. So we'll have bowl coverage, team coverage throughout. We got kind of an awards deal coming out on Christmas Day. We'll have another podcast for you on Christmas Eve. We'll continue to talk about this basketball team. We'll do a little mailbag work for you on the podcast next week as well. But again, continued recruiting coverage as Tennessee's got room left, and continue to evaluate people, continued football coverage as well. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Volquest.com podcast. For Austin Price, Jesse Simonton, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend, everybody.